The air in the restaurant was thick with tension. A man in a sharp suit sat frozen in his seat, his eyes wide with confusion. Across from him, a young woman with long curly hair and flawless makeup clutched her torn waist bead, her face pale with fear. People gathered around them, whispering. Some pointed at the man, others at the woman. "What did she do to him?" someone murmured. The man, Brian, turned his head slowly, his voice shaking. "Where am I?" he asked. His hands trembled as he looked around, as if seeing the place for the first time. Then his gaze fell on the young woman. His face twisted in confusion. "Who are you?" The woman gasped. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Someone grabbed her by the arm. "Speak. What did you do to him?" Rita's heart pounded in her chest. How had things gotten to this point? 3 months earlier, Rita sat on her small, worn-out mattress, watching Mercy through the corner of her eye. Mercy had just returned from a shopping spree. She emptied her designer bags onto her bed. Shiny high heels, the latest iPhone, and a golden wristwatch that sparkled under the dim hostel light. She wore a silky pink dress that hugged her figure, her long straight wig falling over her shoulders like a river of gold. Rita sighed and looked down at her phone, a small, cracked screen device she had been using for years. She was hungry, but she had spent her last money on a bottle of water that morning. She sat on her bed, hugging her knees as she watched Mercy get ready for another night out. Their tiny shared dorm room looked like 2 different worlds. On Mercy's side, there were designer bags, expensive shoes, and a makeup collection that looked like it belonged in a celebrity's dressing room. Her latest iPhone was charging beside a stack of neatly arranged dollar bills, a pair of golden heels gleaming in the dim light. Rita's side of the room, however, was depressing. Her bed had no proper bedspread, just an old wrapper she used as a cover. Her only pair of slippers sat by the door, the sole almost worn out. She had just one handbag, which she had been using for 2 years, and her books were stacked in a messy pile because she had no bookshelf. Her stomach rumbled, but she ignored it. Had always been like this. Mercy and Rita were roommates, but they lived completely different lives. Mercy had everything. Rita had nothing. Mercy turned to the mirror, applying her lip gloss in slow, careful strokes. She wore a tight-fitted gown that hugged her curves perfectly, her long, curly hair cascading down her back. She radiated wealth and confidence. Rita bit her lip, frustration growing inside her. Rita had wondered about it for months. And now she had had enough. Taking a deep breath, she finally spoke. "Mercy," she said, her voice small but firm. "I need to ask you something." Mercy, who was taking selfies in front of the mirror, turned to look at her. "What is it?" Rita swallowed. "How do you make your money?" For a moment there was silence. Then Mercy's lips curled into a smirk. "Why do you ask?" Rita hesitated, but then she decided to be honest. "I want to be like you." Mercy let out a soft chuckle. "You? Like me?" She walked over to Rita's bed and sat beside her. "Are you ready for that kind of life?" Rita nodded quickly. "Yes, I'm tired of struggling. I want to have money too. I want to dress well. I want to eat what I want and go wherever I like. Please, Mercy, tell me what you do." Mercy sighed and leaned in close, lowering her voice. "It's not something just anyone can do." "I don't care," Rita said desperately. "I'll do anything." Mercy studied her for a moment, then suddenly, she lifted the hem of her dress slightly, revealing something around her waist. A beaded string. Rita blinked. "What's that?" Mercy smiled. "This," she whispered, "is my secret." Rita frowned. "A waist bead." Mercy nodded. "But not just any waist bead. This one is special." Rita's confusion deepened. "What do you mean?" Mercy leaned back against the bed and sighed. "Whenever I wear this waist bead, men can't resist me. Especially wealthy men. It's like they're under a spell." Rita's mouth fell open. "A spell?" Mercy nodded. "At first I didn't believe it. But the first time I wore it, something happened. A rich man saw me on the road, stopped his car, and begged to give me a ride. He gave me money just like that. And when I got close to him, it was like he lost control of himself. Since then, every man I've been with has done whatever I asked." Rita stared at her in shock. "Are you saying that this waist bead is magic?" Mercy shrugged. "Call it whatever you like. But I know what it does." Rita's heart pounded. Could it really be true? Could a simple waist bead make men give her everything she wanted? She looked around the small, stuffy hostel room, the peeling walls, the empty food containers on the floor. She was tired of this life. "I want one," she said suddenly. Mercy raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Mercy smirked. "Then you need money. The waist bead doesn't come for free." Rita's heart sank. "But I don't have money." "Then find some," Mercy said, standing up. "Because tomorrow, I'm taking you to where I got mine." Rita bit her lip. She had no money, no savings. The only money she had was the one meant for her textbooks. But she didn't care. This was her chance. She would do whatever it took. That night, as Mercy lay on her luxurious bed, scrolling through her phone, Rita sat in the darkness, clutching her purse tightly. Rita barely slept that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. What if Mercy was telling the truth? What if the waist bead really had the power to attract wealthy men? What if this was her way out of poverty? By the time morning came, she had already made up her mind. She clutched her purse, feeling the money inside. The money meant for her textbooks. A voice deep inside warned her that she was making a mistake, but she ignored it. She wanted a better life. And if Mercy could do it, so could she. Mercy took her through the city, leading her away from the bright, luxurious streets into a quieter, darker part of town. The further they walked, the fewer people they saw. The buildings looked older, the streetlights dimmer. Rita hesitated. "Mercy, where exactly are we going?" Mercy smirked. "Relax. This is the only place to get what you're looking for." Finally, they stopped in front of a small store squeezed between two large abandoned buildings. The sign above the door was old and faded, and the glass window was covered in dust. Mercy pushed the door open, and a small bell rang. The inside of the shop was dimly lit, and the air smelled of something strange, a mixture of incense and something metallic. Rita's heart pounded as she looked around. The shelves were filled with all kinds of accessories, bracelets, rings, necklaces, and waist beads. A woman sat behind the counter, dressed in black, her long nails tapping against the wooden surface. She had piercing eyes and a mysterious smile, as if she already knew why they had come. Mercy walked up to her confidently. "She's ready," she said, nodding toward Rita. The woman turned her gaze to Rita and studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Are you sure about this?" Rita swallowed. "Yes." The woman smirked and stood up. She walked over to one of the shelves and picked up a small, beaded string. The beads shimmered under the dim light, glowing faintly. "This one," the woman said, holding it out to Rita. "It is powerful, but it comes with a price." Rita's fingers trembled as she reached for it. "How much?" The woman named her price, and Rita's stomach dropped. It was almost all the money she had. She thought about her textbooks. She thought about her empty stomach. She thought about Mercy's expensive clothes, her latest phone, her designer bags. She pulled out the money and placed it on the counter. The woman smiled, taking the cash and handing over the waist bead. "Once you wear this, men will notice you. They will desire you. And if you get close enough, they will obey you." Rita's breath hitched. "Obey me." The woman leaned in slightly. "They won't be able to say no." Rita's hands tightened around the waist bead. This was it. She had taken the first step. That evening, back at the hostel, Rita locked herself in the room and carefully tied the waist bead around her waist. She turned in front of the mirror, examining herself. The beads felt warm against her skin, as if they were alive. She took a deep breath. Now it was time to see if it really worked. She put on her best dress, a tight, simple gown that Mercy had given her weeks ago. She styled her hair neatly and applied a little makeup. Then she stepped out into the city. First, nothing seemed different. People walked past her like they always did. Cars sped down the road. But then, it happened. A black SUV slowed down beside her. The tinted window rolled down, revealing a well-dressed man in his 50s. He had a gold watch on his wrist and an expensive cologne that filled the air. "Excuse me, beautiful," he said smoothly. "Do you need a ride?" Rita's breath caught in her throat. It was happening. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, thank you." She climbed into the car, her heart pounding. The man smiled at her as he drove. "You have a special kind of beauty," he said. "There's something about you. I can't explain it." Rita said nothing. She could feel it now, the power Mercy talked about. She didn't have to do much. He was already hooked. When they reached her stop, she reached for the door handle, but the man suddenly stopped her. "Wait," he said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. Rita's hands trembled as she took it. She opened it slightly and gasped. It was full of cash. She looked up at the man in shock. Why are you giving me this?" He smiled. "I don't know. I just feel like I should." Rita felt dizzy. It was real. It was really happening. That night she sat on her bed, staring at the money, her heart racing. This was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Rita's life changed. She wore the waist bead every day, and every day men stopped her. Some offered her rides, others bought her gifts, and some simply gave her money without her even asking. Mercy watched with amusement. "I told you," she said one night as Rita counted her money. "Now you're one of us." Rita grinned. She no longer worried about textbooks. She no longer worried about food. She bought new clothes, new shoes, a new phone. She had everything she wanted. But soon she wanted more. She didn't just want random men giving her money. She wanted someone who could take care of her permanently. Rita had tasted power, and now she wanted more. No longer was she the struggling girl who envied Mercy's lifestyle. Now, she had wealthy men begging for her attention, throwing money at her without question. But something was missing. These men came and went, each one disappearing after a few encounters. She wanted something permanent. She wanted a man who would take care of her fully, a man who would be hers alone. That was when she met Brian. Brian was different from the other men. He was not just rich, he was powerful. He owned businesses, had political connections, and drove a fleet of luxury cars. The first time Rita saw him, she knew he was exactly what she had been looking for. He was older, in his late 40s, and well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than everything she had ever owned. She was walking through the high-end part of the city when his black Range Rover pulled up beside her. The tinted window rolled down, and there he was. "Excuse me," Brian said, his deep voice smooth like honey. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" Rita smiled, tilting her head slightly. "I don't think so." Brian chuckled. "Maybe I was just hoping we had. What's your name?" "Rita." "Beautiful name," he said, nodding. "Where are you heading?" "Nowhere important." "Then let me take you somewhere important," Brian said with a charming smile. Rita hesitated for only a moment before getting into the car. She could feel the waist bead growing warm around her waist. The power was already working. As Brian drove, they talked. He asked about her life, what she did, what her dreams were. Rita, of course, lied. She painted a picture of herself as an independent, high-class woman, someone who had standards and didn't just entertain any man. Brian was hooked. By the end of the evening, he had given her his number and told her to call him any time she needed something. Over the next few weeks, Rita and Brian grew closer. He sent her money, more than any other man had ever given her. He took her to expensive restaurants, bought her gifts, and treated her like a queen. Rita played her role well. She acted like she wasn't just interested in his money, like she genuinely cared about him. But deep down, she knew the waist bead was doing most of the work. Whenever she was with Brian, he looked at her like he was in a trance. He never said no to anything she asked for. It felt like she had complete control over him. But there was one problem. Brian had a wife. Brian's wife, Olivia, had been married to him for over 15 years. She had always trusted her husband, believing he was a faithful man. But lately, something had changed. Brian had started acting strangely. He was always distracted, always on his phone. He would leave the house for long hours without explanation, and when he was home, he barely paid attention to her. First, Olivia thought it was stress from work. But then one night she checked his phone. And what she saw made her heart stop. Messages. From a girl named Rita. "Baby, I miss you. When are you taking me shopping again? I need a new iPhone. The one you got me last time is already outdated." And worse, Brian's replies. "Anything for you, my love. Don't worry, I'll send the money tomorrow. I'll see you soon. My wife is getting suspicious, but I don't care." Olivia's hands shook as she read through the messages. Her husband was cheating. But what confused her the most was how desperate he sounded. Brian was a strong-willed man, a man who never let anyone control him. So why was he acting like a slave to this girl? She had to find out who Rita was. And she had to put an end to this. Olivia spent the next few days investigating. She followed Brian's movements, checked his credit card transactions, and even tracked his car when he left the house. Finally, she found what she was looking for. Brian was planning to meet Rita at a restaurant the following evening. Olivia decided she would be there too. Olivia barely slept that night. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with questions. How had her husband, a strong and successful man, fallen so completely for this girl? And why did it feel like he wasn't himself anymore? She knew men cheated, but this was different. The way Brian spoke in those messages, like a man under a spell, chilled her to the bone. Tomorrow she would find out the truth. The next evening, Olivia dressed in a simple but elegant gown and followed Brian to the restaurant. She had memorized his messages with Rita and knew exactly where to find them. She arrived early and took a seat in a quiet corner, hidden behind a decorative plant. She watched the entrance, waiting. Minutes later, Brian walked in. And then came Rita. Olivia's breath caught as she saw the girl for the first time. Rita was young, stunning, and carried herself with confidence. But there was something else, something unsettling about her presence. Brian's eyes lit up the moment he saw her. He pulled out a chair for Rita, ordered the most expensive wine, and leaned in close, hanging on to her every word. He looked nothing like the man Olivia had married. Her hands clenched into fists under the table. It was time. She stood up and marched toward them. "Brian!" Her husband froze. Rita's smile faded instantly. Brian turned to Olivia, blinking as if he had just woken from a dream. "Oh, Olivia! What are you doing here? I should be asking you the same thing." Olivia's voice was calm but firm. He turned to Rita. "And you? So you're the one?" Rita tried to keep her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." Olivia laughed coldly. "Don't play dumb. I know everything." She turned back to Brian. "What does she have that makes you act like this? What has she done to you?" Brian opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked lost. Rita grabbed her purse. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this nonsense." She tried to stand up, but Olivia was faster. Before Rita could escape, Olivia reached for her wrist. And then it happened. Her hand brushed against Rita's waist. And something snapped. The moment Olivia's fingers touched the waist bead, it tore apart. The small beads scattered onto the floor, rolling under the table and across the tiles. The restaurant went silent. Rita gasped. Her hands flew to her waist. "No!" Brian suddenly jerked back in his seat. His eyes widened, then darted around the room in confusion. "What?" He rubbed his temples. "Where am I?" His breathing grew heavy, panic setting in. He turned to Rita. "Who are you?" Rita felt the blood drain from her face. The spell had broken. Brian looked at Olivia. "Honey, what's going on?" Olivia crossed her arms. "That's what I'd like to know." By now, people in the restaurant were watching. The scene had drawn attention. Murmurs filled the air. "What just happened? Did you see that? She was using something on him." A waiter bent down and picked up one of the fallen beads, turning it in his fingers. "These aren't normal beads," he muttered. Rita's breathing was rapid. Her mind raced for a way out. But it was too late. People were already whispering. The magic had faded, and without it, she was just another girl caught in a scandal. She grabbed her purse and turned to leave, but Brian stood up, blocking her way. "What did you do to me?" His voice was sharp, filled with anger and confusion. Why do I feel like I've been living in a dream?" Olivia stepped closer. "Because you were." Brian shook his head, his hands shaking. "I spent money on you. I gave you everything. I even ignored my wife for you. But I don't remember why." His eyes flashed with realization. "You used something on me, didn't you?" Rita said nothing. The truth was clear on her face. The whispers grew louder. "She put something on him. A waist bead that controls men. This is witchcraft." Rita turned, desperate to run, but a waiter blocked the exit. People were closing in. Rita's heart pounded as she realized she had no escape. Mercy had warned her that the waist bead came with a price. She thought the price was just money. She had never imagined this. Brian turned to Olivia. His eyes were full of guilt. "I don't know what to say. I feel like I wasn't myself." Olivia exhaled. "That's because you weren't." Brian turned back to Rita, his voice shaking with anger. "How many men have you done this to?" Rita took a step back. "Brian, please." But Brian wasn't listening. He had just woken up from a nightmare, and he was furious. "You think you can just take people's money? Control their minds?" He clenched his fists. "You ruined my life." Rita opened her mouth to protest, but then she felt something. Something was wrong. The waist bead was gone, and with it, something inside her felt empty. She suddenly felt weak, light-headed. Like all the power she had once felt was slipping away. And then, just like that, she collapsed. "You'll never trust girls that use waist bead again." Gasps filled the restaurant as Rita crumpled to the floor. "Someone call an ambulance," a waiter shouted. But Olivia stepped forward, her gaze locked on Rita. "No. She doesn't need a hospital. This is something else." Brian stood frozen, his hands shaking. He had never believed in such things before, but now, after everything that had just happened, he wasn't so sure. Rita groaned, her body trembling. Sweat covered her forehead as she clutched her stomach. Power was gone. She could feel it slipping away, leaving her weak, empty, ordinary. The whispers around her grew louder. "Is this what happens when the spell breaks? She's been using men, and now it's catching up to her. Serves her right." Rita's vision blurred. She tried to push herself up, but her arms felt like they had no strength. Mercy had warned her. She had told her that the waist bead wasn't just a charm, it was a pact. And now that it was broken, Rita was paying the price. Brian's face twisted with anger. "You made a fool out of me." He took a step toward Rita, but Olivia grabbed his arm. "Leave her," she said calmly. "She's already lost." Brian clenched his jaw, his rage burning inside him. "How much money did I waste on her? How much of my life did I lose?" "You can get your money back," Olivia said, "but you can't get back the time she stole from you." Her words hit him like a hammer. His shoulders slumped. She was right. Nothing could undo what had happened. But at least now he was free. Brian turned away from Rita, shaking his head. He had never felt so humiliated, so betrayed. He had nearly lost everything, for what? A girl with a cursed waist bead. Never again. The restaurant manager stepped forward. "This girl has caused enough trouble. I don't want her here. Two security guards appeared, grabbing Rita by the arms. No, wait. Rita pleaded. Please, just listen to me. No one wants to hear your lies, the manager snapped. Take her outside. Rita struggled weakly as the guards dragged her out. The crowd parted, watching in silence. Mercy's words rang in her ears. The waist bead gives, but it also takes. She had ignored the warning, and now she was paying for it. As they pushed her out into the cold night, she realized something. She had lost everything. The money, power, the attention. She was back to being nobody. And worse, she could never get it back. Weeks passed. The story of Rita and her waist beads spread across the city. People whispered about her in hushed voices, warning each other to be careful of girls like her. Some believed she had run away. Others claimed they had seen her wandering the streets, begging for money. But no one knew for sure. As for Brian, he spent months repairing the damage the affair had caused to his marriage. Olivia, though hurt, eventually forgave him. But he was never the same again. The experience had changed him forever. And from that day on, he never looked at waist beads the same way again. Mercy, still the richest girl on campus, continued her lavish lifestyle. But now fewer girls envied her. They had seen what happened to Rita. They knew the price of greed. And they knew deep in their hearts, you'll never trust girls that use waist beads again.